Enthusiastic crowd. Nice to see the revolution is still alive and well, and especially here in North Carolina. That's great. I want to thank TJ for introducing me, and as was indicated, he is involved in the political process, and it would be a great deal of help to me, to you, to America, if we see him in the U.S. Congress.
Yep.
But I really appreciate you coming out. I get questions a lot of time about what's this campaign all about. Well, very simply, this campaign is all about freedom. And oftentimes I'm asked, why do you continue to go? Aren't the numbers against you? Doesn't it look like the other candidate that's still in the race? There were 11 at one time. We're down to 2, so I would say we're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
You're saying, well, but he has all the delegates and you're not likely to take over. What's the purpose? Well, there's a very precise purpose. There's a lot of enthusiasm, and I made this statement not too many months ago. I said, if there's enthusiasm, if there are volunteers, if there's money in the bank, and you want to continue the process, and we want to go all the way to the convention and make sure our message is heard, that is what I intend to do. It's been an exciting year because a lot more happened than I ever dreamed. I was very reluctant to become a candidate because I was very logical and explained to everybody why the message wouldn't be that well received. Not because I had any doubts about the message. I'm 100% convinced the message is correct. I was not confident about myself, and I was not confident that the people really cared and how the young people would respond. And, of course, we never know how big the remnant is. That remaining number of people who know and believe what truly is right for society. Lo and behold, I have discovered that the message has been well received. The young people have responded to you so well, and the remnant is much bigger than I ever dreamed. This means, in spite of our problems that we face, and they are very serious, and I will talk about those problems, what I think the solutions are, that I'm more optimistic now than I was a year ago. That doesn't mean it's going to be smooth sailing. And I've always marveled at coming out and speaking and talking to a lot of people, talking about our problems, and I don't, gloss over them, and I claim they're very, very serious. And yet, most individuals who get involved are very optimistic and say, wow, this is great. Now, they feel good about it. And I go, why are they feeling good after we talk about all the problems? Somebody explained it to me once, and they said, you really can't solve the problem unless you first admit what the problem is. And I think this is what we have here today. It's sort of like treating somebody on addiction, an alcoholic or a drug addict. They usually don't get much help until they finally decide, I need some help, and admit the problem. Admission to the problem is the biggest thing. In many ways, we're living with an addiction in Washington, D.C. and on big government. People, even today, this week, endlessly, they keep going to Washington. The worse the economy gets, whether it's the financial markets with a housing bubble or a high cost of living or medical care, it's always rush to government, and the government is supposed to solve these problems. And if you don't do it in the political sense, boy, the members of Congress are terrified. Oh, we have to do it, even though I know it's not going to do much good. I'm afraid I might lose the next election. Well, I'm worried about losing the next generation, and that's why we have to change the course of this country. But we've been in trouble for a few years. We complain a lot about this administration. The deficits have exploded, and the war goes on, and we see no turnaround, and yet we as Republicans, have been in the Republican Party. Our platform has generally been very conservative and oriented toward the constitutional, personal liberty, balanced budget, free market system, and a sensible foreign policy. Republicans traditionally, over the last 100 years, have generally been much better on avoiding wars and getting out of wars than they were in starting wars. But here we are as Republicans defending a war that we deliberately started and it wasn't necessary to do it. So we now, even as recently as the year 2000, we had George Bush campaigning on the slogan in the foreign policy of no nation building and no policing the world. We were critical of what Clinton was doing, and yet immediately afterwards the plans were laid. Even before 9/11, they talked about when are we going to have regime change in Iraq. So the policies were designed not by the George Bush and his neocon friends, but actually the policy was designed precisely about Iraq in 1998. Because I can remember that precisely, this bill coming to the floor, that we were going to change our foreign policy and have regime change in Iraq. At that time, I spoke out against it, and for 5 years I said our course is leading us into war, it's unnecessary war, and we should never have gone. I offered the solution to this: obey the Constitution, and when this bill came to the floor, the resolution, or came to the committee that was on international relations, I said, look, I don't want to go to war, but if you all want to go to war and you think we should go to war, you better do it precisely the way we're supposed to do it. You're supposed to declare war if you want to go to war. You're not supposed to just allow the president to go to war when he wants to. So when I brought up the resolution and I insisted on a vote, there was some strong criticism directed toward me. Of course, I was used to that. I haven't had that done before. And the chairman of the committee said that this part of the Constitution dealing with the war power is anachronistic. We don't follow that anymore. And why would I do this? The ranking member at that time got up and said, this is frivolous. The whole idea that I would bring up the subject of discussing a war resolution. The argument being, of course, that's the law of the land, but also in the practical sense, if we're going to make such a decision as to take our country to war, it should be done by the will of the people, and the people should be behind it. And the Constitution says precisely only Congress can declare war. Then, if we make that decision, then it wouldn't be as much of a political war. It would be because it's truly in our national defense, and then we would declare it. The people should be behind it. Then we should fight it and win it and get it over with instead of these long, drawn-out wars that just drain us. If we only and my personal experience had a lot to do with that attitude, not only studying the Constitution, but also just good common sense. But I was called to military duty out of my medical residency. I left Duke in the early part of end of 1960. So I was in a medical residency at Henry Ford Hospital. I got a draft notice in October 1962. Happened to be the missile crisis with Cuba. It was the height and the peak of the Cold War. The Soviets had 40,000 nuclear weapons. And it was a serious time. So I was called to duty, served 5 years in the Air Force, but that was an undeclared war. And I can remember all those years of the argument, well, you can't leave now. But the people got tired of it. They said, get out of there, get out of there. What happened in 1968? That was one of the reasons the Republicans returned to power, because this war had dragged on, and Johnson, and especially Johnson and even Kennedy, was blamed for this. So they said, no, if we ever left Vietnam, there would be domino effect, and the whole area would be overridden by communism. Well, there was a bit of chaos, but nothing happened in 68. It lingered for another 4 years, and another 30,000 American soldiers were killed needlessly. Then we had to leave. And still they argued, oh, there'll be chaos, there'll be chaos. After a bit of time, there were some adjustments, and who would have ever suspected that China would become our banker and we would be investing in Vietnam, which goes to prove that if we'd have always practiced what the founders said and listened to the Constitution and approached this in a more peaceful manner, we would have been able to achieve in peace what we couldn't achieve in war.